Hey there, and welcome to the Cow Emporium. Today's video is a story, a tale that began in the 1800s in Manitoba, Canada. Now, as stories are tales that are told by humans, there's always room for error. I've been sitting on this story since the early 2000s when we first discovered a connection between our past relatives and Louis Riel. This story began because of our great-grandfather's connection to Louis Riel. Who is Louis Riel, you might ask? If you aren't a Canadian, French, or Métis, there is a distinct chance you have never heard of this person who led two resistances and formed the province of Manitoba, formerly known as the Red River Settlement. Before I get into the details of our ancestors, I think you should know a little bit about Riel and what his life entailed. Louis Riel was born in 1844 and was the eldest son of a prominent St. Boniface Métis family. At 14, he was sent to Montreal to train for the priesthood. By 1868, he had left school and was back at St. Boniface supporting his recently widowed mother and siblings. Riel found the Red River Métis distressed by Canada's plans to annex the Hudson's Bay Company lands. They feared losing their traditional lands and livelihood. An 1869 land survey by the Government of Canada stirred Riel into action. He formed a militia, turned back surveyors, took possession of Upper Fort Garry, and began the Red River Resistance. During the winter of 1869 to 1870, Riel, who was just 25 years old, formed a provisional government and presented Canada with the Bill of Rights that on May 12 became the Manitoba Act, 1870. Riel's provisional government approved it on June 24th, and the act came into effect on July 15th. Unfortunately, while his provisional government negotiated with Canada during the winter of 1870, Riel allowed an agitator to be tried and executed for insubordination. Vilified in eastern Canada for the execution, Riel feared lynching by the approaching Wolseley expedition and fled to the U.S. in August of 1870. In following years, Riel was elected to the Canadian Parliament and denied his seat on 3 occasions. In 1874, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death for the 1870 execution of Thomas Scott. Within months, Riel received amnesty on the condition that he will remain in exile for 5 years. In 1884, Riel was raising a family and living in Montana as an American. Asked to negotiate for Saskatchewan Métis, as he had done at Red River, Riel saw opportunity to create a Métis homeland, but Canada sent soldiers instead of negotiators. Métis resistance was defeated in the Northwest Rebellion at Batoche in May of 1885. Found guilty of high treason and hanged in Regina, Riel's life ended November 16, 1885. Today, Louis Riel is widely regarded as the father of Manitoba. Now that we know just the basics of Riel, let's talk about our connection. In 2000, my paternal grandmother passed away, and as my dad and his siblings went through my grandmother's house to clean out her possessions, as my grandfather had passed away in 1998, my dad was given a copied newspaper article from 1932. The article, that was in French, was translated by an auntie a couple of years later and passed back to me. At some family occasion with Glenn's parents, I mentioned this article that showed a connection that our past relative was connected to Louis Riel. You can just imagine the immense surprise when a relative of Glenn's was also connected to Riel, only our families were on complete opposite sides of supporting the rebellious leader. The newspaper article that came from my French Métis side of the family talked about a man named Edward Massey, and the article, written in 1932, talks about how Edward, born October 31st of 1842, thought of at the time of the writing of the article to be the oldest French Canadian in the Western provinces. Edward lived 16 years in St. Boniface, Manitoba. The place, I presume, was where he met and befriended Riel. Edward is quoted as saying, when asked about the past, that he assisted at the funeral of Louis Riel, whom they knew well. When asked if he had any remarkable incidents in his life, Edward said, no, because I have never had anything to do with lawyers. Now, knowing how my family is connected, let's head over to Glenn's side of the family and see what's up there. A newspaper announcement titled W. J. Meacham, veteran of the 85 Rebellion, dies. It's possible at this time you can piece things together, but I'll walk you through just to be sure. Glenn's great-great-granddad was a resident of Manitoba for 49 years, having moved to Winnipeg in 1882. It was only a few short years later that William became involved in the Riel Rebellion, as he was one of the few picked escorts of the Midlanders and the 90th Battalion, half of each, who guarded Riel after his capture and escorted him to Regina for trial, where Riel was ultimately found guilty of treason and sentenced to death. It's possible that you've heard the saying, it's a small world. I think that certainly applies here. There is a lot more to the Louis Riel story, and my intention was not to make it small, but to show the remarkable connection between the history of our families. Riel, during his trial, said he looked to his children's children, shaking hands with the Protestants of the New World in a friendly manner. I have done my best to recall this tale as accurately as possible. I have been somewhat nervous to tell this story, but I am now glad to, because I have done the best with the information that I have. Thanks so much for listening, and be assured that these two rebellious great-great-grandchildren have got each other's backs. Take care, and bye for now.